scan, inspect, monitor. But very many words are part of social media behavior. Check out, scan, track, follow. We may not say that, but spying, eavesdropping are a part of it. We are actually looking into the conversations two other people are having without participating in it. They don't even know that you are seeing that conversation or watching the conversation take place. Sometimes you're out there, you deliberately, you're willing to be inspected. Please go ahead, examine me. There is that kind of an attitude also prompting us towards certain conversations. Both are taking place. So networking involves the language of espionage. But what is interesting is that there's one word missing in this words associated with surveillance, which is associated very much with Facebook behavior. And I think that word is even more dangerous, which is missing from surveillance: stalking. That's a word I regularly hear on the lips of the youngsters when they talk about their Facebook behavior. They use it without any inhibition, as though it's a kind of, it's a very, very legitimate behavior. So that is why in the last decade, on a few years, when this OTT platforms, all those becoming a part of our visual culture, there are two important web series that went on to become huge hits, web series and television shows. One was Gossip Girl, the other was Pretty Little Liars. They both are centered on social media surveillance. They become part of our everyday popular entertainment. So that is how deeply pervasive and indistinguishable surveillance has become from our everyday life practices. Social media has generated a participatory culture where we are all equally consumers and agents. We are creators of content. Kerala has a high literacy rate and internet penetration. Cyberbullying, trolling, and abuse have become rampant. These are the obvious visible responses, but chauvinism and sexism act at a subterranean level in very subtle and dangerous ways, making women acceptable and non-acceptable. Where even the publicly invisible people work as informants. So this is a digital version of gossip, as I told you earlier. What is sad and unfortunate here is that we don't have a way out of it. Women and girls in particular, in India, and maybe in all parts of the world to a certain extent, so there will be cultural variation from place to place. We are caught between surveillance and safety. In many women's colleges that I know of, they are prohibited from bringing mobile phones for fear of distraction and deviance. But parents insist they carry mobile phones out of anxiety. There is a certain inevitability associated with surveillance, particularly when CCTV cameras unravel crimes committed in the dark. I'm definitely referring to that particular incident that happened in a theater in Edappal, where a child molestation case occurred, and it was a CCTV camera that registered this heinous act. Definitely, CCTV camera, many people did not know that the cameras were active while the theater was screening a film, and there were memes and trolls coming out the next day, and there was even one post, I'm not mentioning the person who put out the post, he, quite a famous person, he said, "Oh good Lord, I didn't know that there was a camera operating in the theater. How do I cry and laugh when I see a moving film?" So you understand there is encroachment to privacy in one side, there is also a crime being done. So we are caught between these two, we are in between security and crime. It is just a few, some time back, a Bangalore newspaper in Bangalore announced very proudly there are 16,000 cameras being, fixed, installed in various parts of Bangalore just to protect women, to prevent crime against women. So it's a pride of a city to talk about the number of CCTV cameras that are operating. But does this ever act as a deterrent? How does this work against women themselves is a question seldom asked. Naomi Wolf, a very important intellectual, just a few years back, actually as old as 2012, because the surveillance started becoming a huge threat to privacy in America a long time back. That's another point that I would like to mention, is that the discussions around surveillance are all very culture specific. In India, even now, the encroachment into privacy is not something which we talk about much, because the whole notion of privacy is not so, I think it has not yet become that solidified. Because in a family, do we really have this respect for privacy? I just would like to mention the film Drishyam that became hugely popular in the recent times. And it's all about the mobile, a boy filming a girl in the mobile, and ultimately he turning out to be a very perverse, criminal-minded person who has not been monitored with care by the parents. But my issue is different. Now, there is a situation in the film where the actor Siddiq, who acts as the father of the boy, says, "Endinanu ithra privacy? Why do you need privacy so much?" So privacy in all its importance is not something which is actually seriously considered as a person's right in Indian society, I think. I mean, this is my hunch to some extent. Privacy is considered to be something very dark. So there is this need to be transparent, and we also need to be private. So Gary Marks also says we want people to attend to us, but we also want to be left alone. So we are actually caught between these two situations as ordinary individuals. So Naomi Wolf says that sexual privacy is something very important, and if you have the cameras being used in a particular way as to snoop on your sexual orientation, then it can be used in a very punitive way against those sexualities or queer identities who are not who have not been discovered as yet, who don't want to be out as yet, but they can be used as in very, very criminal ways. There's this web series called Made in Heaven. Some of you might have seen it, some of you may not have. I think it is still available on Netflix, where there is this gay individual who's being thrown out of his rented flat because the owner of the flat has been snooping on him. Not to get him caught by a heteronormative state, but only to indulge in his own private fantasies. So it shows the layers of perversion happening there. The surveillance has become a very integral part of our fictions, our narratives, our popular culture and popular entertainment. It would be interesting if you could look at the way it is being used in various ways in our popular entertainment. So what I'm trying to say is that it's a double-edged sword, which needs to be talked about and interrogated constantly. Gary Marks makes this point. He says that making surveillance, as with any technology, more visible and understandable hardly guarantees a just and accountable society. So just because we talk about surveillance very often, we have seminars, we discuss it threadbare, that doesn't automatically ensure a just and accountable society. But it is surely a necessary condition for one. It can be a condition for an accountable society. My presentation is very brief. I'm talking about very, very small things, but this is not to devalue the space of social media as a precious space where women have been negotiating very intensely to project a self which they want to be, or to air those voices of grievance, of trauma and torture. Just talking about it, you can get out of it to a certain extent. And the marginalized also have been using it to assert, to say that, hey, we are here. It is used to resist, to protest. It's also a space of surveillance, as Ajay put it earlier, or counter surveillance. And my presentation is not to devalue it at all, but only to say how, I was just trying to show how a society that's caught between tradition and modernity makes use of the social space of social media as instrument of surveilling. And sometimes it can determine gendered behavior to a certain extent. Sometimes gender escapes all surveillance and bursts out in a million new forms. So this is my brief presentation, a brief submission. I hope you have very, very interesting and productive discussions in the next two sessions also. This is just one aspect of the surveillance society that we are living in. So whenever we are accusing the powers that be, the authorities, also take a look at oneself and how willingly or unwillingly we ourselves become tools of surveillance in some form or other. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That was a highly inspirational talk, and being part of a male-dominated society, maybe everyone, including me, will have many things to introspect. The session was also live with anecdotes from personal experience, movies, and visual culture, and discuss the way how abuse is being normalized or deemed normal in the social media space. Thank you so much for that talk. Now, if anyone has some questions, you can have it here.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are. You are. Yes, you are.
My God, ma'am, you have grabbed our attention by just dissecting a very sensitive topic. Surveillance and patriarchy always go hand in hand. Some are there willing to be gazed and scanned. Social media generated a culture of sexism in a subtle way. CCTV in education institutions, cinema, theatre, etc. are encroachments of privacy. I agree. But ma'am, suggest us some do's and don'ts for the girls of new generation.
You are asking me to participate in the act of surveillance once again. Is that do's and don'ts? How do I tell them? I can't tell them don't do it. That is an act of surveillance, isn't it? But you're asking me to go against the spirit of my talk. So I think the girls who are all here, they're all of that age to decide how judiciously to use the space. You know, actually, I mentioned all these anecdotes in my class. I told them, I just want to tell you how the society is perceiving us. See, I also use social media. So when that boy when the girls told me about their friend, I asked him, so do you think I am a bad woman? Very often I use the social media, I access the many posts of my friends after 10 o'clock. So he looked so shocked, so he didn't mean that at all. But then he was so shocked. But that was one way of, I don't just want to advise girls. I would like to tell the boys, if that space is free for you, why can't it be free for the girls? That is, my question is for boys, sir, and to the men, to accept the rights of the girls to enter. See, we are at a point where women are entering the public space very assertively, very strongly, asking very important questions. And that is the true expansion of the democratic egalitarian spirit of our society. So at that time, even at that time, there are people who consider a girl who is active after 10 o'clock, she's considered to be a woman of loose virtue to whom you can talk any rubbish. So I think it is I would like to speak more to the boys, sir, not to the girls at this point. But what you asked is right, even to those women who are very judgmental on the way the girls are expressing themselves, I find senior women in our society, people who grew up before the social media times, they're very judgmental, they're very harsh. They don't understand what the new generation is all about, or how the new generation is shaping up. So I think it's very important to be more open, to be more understanding to the various kinds of problems that youngsters are facing today, to understand their Facebook behavior. So you have to be in tune with the times. What I find very, very, the double standards in our society is that we want to have all the, the profits of a technologized society. But you're not ready to take the assertion of individuality from women. That's also a part of this, isn't it? We are not ready to take it in. So this is something which I want to tell you. So I don't know whether you agree with me, but this is what I feel. Okay. Thank you, sir. Yes.
Okay, you have answered it wonderfully, ma'am. Thank you.
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah, hi, Meera.
Hello.
Hi, Meera.
Hi, ma'am.
Yeah,
How are you? It's been very long since you came to our college.
yeah.
We're in a different.
Yeah, we are in a different time zone altogether, right? So that's why.
Right, ma'am. This is less of a question. It's more of an add-on to what you were discussing, since we were talking about how some women themselves become instruments in the process of surveillance. I was thinking of hegemonic femininities, the concept derived from Cornell's hegemonic masculinities. So I was just wondering out loud in that direction.
Meera, I didn't get your question. What was the question that you asked? I'm sorry, I missed out on the last part.
Yes, ma'am. It was less of a question. I was just wondering out loud, because when women themselves become part of, enforcing surveillance, it could be because of the hegemonic femininities, pariah femininities that come together.
Absolutely. I mean, and there's nothing new in this. Even when these women are themselves empowered women. That's what is interesting. These women who have internalized patriarchy, they themselves conform to the notions of the good woman, bad woman syndrome, and they have actually benefited from this particular capitalistic social structure. This woman, particularly, she's an entrepreneur, she's reaping profits, and then she's talking about a woman, another girl, a younger girl, who's actually making use of the social media to project or to further the possibilities of her career, whatever it is. In her own way, she is judgmental. So women as agents of patriarchy have always been there, particularly Brahminical patriarchy. As Ajay pointed out earlier, the upper caste patriarchy. They have always been there. And sometimes I find women are more censorious. Women are more censorious and more lethal in the way they carry out the patriarchal. Why? Because they stand to gain when they carry out those patriarchal, demands. They stand to gain in the patriarchy. That is how patriarchy functions. It rewards those who conform. See, no patriarchy is so closed that some women don't find spaces in it. Patriarchy has always functioned by giving space to certain kinds of feminities to survive and thrive. I don't want to mention names and make it look very personal and individual, but look at the kind of female presence among our political leadership. Whatever be the party, you find they very often conforming to the norms of a very Brahminical patriarchy, very upper class patriarchy. Whatever be the color of the political group that they belong to. This is happening. That's why I said I don't want to mention any particular person. When I say that some women politicians' faces may immediately come up in your mind, but I'm not talking about any particular color. I just want to cite one thing. I mean, very often we identify a particular political group as anyway fundamentalist, rightist. I'm not mentioning names. It is that. But what about the women in the so-called progressive alliances? They also stand by extremely discriminative practices. There was I was hoping some discussion will come out so that I can mention this. I don't know how many of you followed rather closely an incident of a woman member of a party, of a political group, blaming another person, racing. It was a Me Too against a person in the top rungs of that particular group. And when there was of course, an inquiry was conducted with a lady in it, with a very prominent woman politician in it, and the inquiry report came out, and I was stunned by the report in which how the girl was, they said, yeah, there were some incidents, some misdeeds might have occurred, and all those things very, very vaguely put. Towards the end of it, it was written, the girl is also considered to be a little social. Now, what does that mean in an official report on a political person? What does it mean if a girl is social, she can be played around with? Is that it? See, this is coming from a party which talks about its progressive stand. I was shocked. And it is this word social that was used by those boys who went against a marriage proposal. So I found both together very interesting, What do you mean by, aren't you social, Meera? I think I'm very social. So,
Yes, ma'am. I am.
yeah. So we are all very social, otherwise we wouldn't be here at the webinar, right? So if you are social, people can harass you, manipulate you, or it happens. So girls have to be careful. This is a subtext which is not mentioned there, So
Right.
this is what I was trying to point out, and I thought there was a paucity of time. We can't talk about everything, but then this is what is happening. So we need to be aware. So I'm saying just by a webinar we cannot get out of it, but at least we can be self-critical a bit. That's the whole idea, Meera.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. It's always a delight to listen to your thoughts. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Meera, for that lovely question. Thank you. Yes, exactly. Political parties using social media. I wanted to say that. Yes, just yesterday, Nisha Purushottam, somebody is talking. Jaitra Bharati, please. Yeah. Please. I'm listening. Yes. Yes, please ask your question. Hello. Somebody was trying to ask a question, but what happened? Jaitra Bharati. Who's that?
Yes, just turned his mic off.
Oh, just ask her to turn on the mic, no? Otherwise, I won't be able to hear. She came online, but she...
Yeah, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yeah, Dr. Pradeep, who's Jaitra? Yeah, please.
Yeah,
please.
Yeah, your speech is very informative, but I would like to ask one thing. As you have said that when women are going online, they become visible to the scrutiny, social surveillance. But some discussion also cite that going visible online or in any media is also empowering. Like as we have seen that in the case of the migrant labor, when they became visible in the media, there was a strong support for them, so they became empowered. So how can we negotiate between this visibility and invisibility?
That's exactly what I was trying to point out, Jaitra. That is, we are caught between these two situations. It's a caught situation. Women are all the individuals in the society find social media a very powerful, very empowering platform. At the same time, it is also a platform where their very daring, very original voices get muzzled also. I have seen girls totally, very, very, very brave, bold girls, totally traumatized by the kind of attack on them. Just because they're women. See, it might be something as, something very objective as a film review. But it's being done by a girl, and she did it, it was a Telugu film. I think it was an Allu Arjun film. This became a very important case. She is a very, very, very talented, very brilliant girl. She actually gave a negative review. And it's because it is a she. Even a man could have given a negative review, but the kind of sexist abuse that she had to face would not have happened if the reviewer was a male. See, just like when Nisha Purushottam conducted, somebody has asked me about Nisha Purushottam, and I'm clubbing these two together because I can't take, there won't be time for me to take each question one by one. Nisha Purushottam, Manorama, because she was asking very, very central questions, maybe even questions that you don't like. But what exactly is the democratic culture all about? It's not about elections every 5 years and winning. There's something called democratic culture. Democracy is something that you have to internalize in your being, that you respect a person who's disagreeing with you. You respect, you listen, you respond with mutual respect. That is something which we as a society have not, learned even now. We think democracy is all about elections once in 5 years and voting and changing people in power. That is only the formal aspect of democracy. Even that would be disappearing very soon, I think, because even opposition is lacking these days. But I don't know. So, but the thing is that there is a kind of a mass fascism when a woman is saying something. She may be saying something very different, but then, it's all because she's a woman. She's being subjected to such chauvinist, misogynistic, sexist rhetoric. This is something which you don't see when on the opposite side it's a man. There's a different way of engaging with the person. This is what I was trying to say, Jatra. But at the same time, we are saying this. Look at the way women have come out in solidarity with Nisha and the mediated society, the mainstream media, the political. They have to take cognizance of this. And yesterday, I think Shani brilliantly was engaging the spokesman of the party, a member of which had been tarnishing Nisha. So now it becomes a common discussion, and I see very, very many people who belong to the left coming out and openly disavowing any kind of connection with the person who made that tarnishing comments against Nisha, which itself is a very positive sign. So that is surveillance for you, which Ajay was talking about. That is vigilantism from below, which was saying that, so that expression of social media counts heavily. We are caught between these two. That's what is happening. That's what I was trying to say.
Thank you.
And marriage, okay. I don't know, Dr. Shuddhodhanan, you had mentioned about, what is that, Nisha's case, and I was actually talking about that. Yes. I tried to club it here. I hope you got to hear that.
Hello, ma'am. Hello.
Yes. Yes. Who's speaking?
Ma'am, my name is Huda.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ma'am, okay, we have been speaking about all this gender surveillance throughout the society, even in film industry, in the media and all those things. Let me ask you one thing, ma'am. You have been in this academics for so many years. What have you observed about this thing in this gender surveillance in our academic circle itself? Because, ma'am, because I have been in this teaching field for the last 15 years, and let me tell you that it's very sadly these academicians who are considered to be the highly qualified, highly educated, the polishing people of the society. Even there, you can see this sort of gender surveillance going on. I have seen that within 15 years of span. So I'm just asking, what is your opinion? What do you feel? Of course, academy is a part of the society itself. So doesn't it reflect there also?
It reflects big time. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Am I audible?
It reflects big time. Yes, ma'am, you are very much audible.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. As you said, academic field is very much part of the society, and unfortunately, all those books that you read and all those political principles you flaunt, and all this idealism, very often even the academics, flaunt very often, it doesn't percolate deep down into their psyche. And this kind of snooping, looking into others' lives and being very censuring and judgmental, it takes place in academia too. There was a time I used to be shocked. I used to think, oh, this person is so learned, and this is the kind of, I'm no longer shocked. I have been I've become grounded. I have been tempered by almost 25 years of experience in academia. I realized that sometimes the most unlearned person, illiterate person, will be more gender sensitive than the most learned. So the amount of degrees that you have to your name, it may make you an expert in a particular field, but not necessarily gender sensitive and woman friendly, as you have rightly pointed out. And it should not be the case, but unhappily it is the case. But the gender sensitive regulations of the UGC have kind of, I have seen horrible things taking place. So, I cannot even, if I start, then it will be a whole another session altogether. I have seen at very important official meetings, women staff, women teachers coming in with tea trays where all the men are seated just because they are women. Can you believe it? Women professors entering with tea trays to serve tea because it's an extension of their domestic labor that they do. I hope I'm audible? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So this is something which you do. Yeah, this is something which goes on. And look at many other academic functions where You can just look, it happens in a very, very subtle manner. The gender discrimination, there are certain sections allotted to women, certain jobs allotted to men. This happens everywhere. Women are very often asked to, very often it's only women who are asked to offer flowers to the main speakers at a venue. Have you noticed that?
Yes, yes.
These are all very subtle ways in which certain of gendered behavior. And you may feel that I'm going over the top.
I think
but it is
what I want
gendered
to ask you,
behavior.
ma'am.
Yes, yes.
What I want to ask is, doesn't any female in our academics have the guts, or you may say, to say that no, I'm not ready to do that. Why this? So can't we just come forward and say like
plenty. Yeah, why not? You may be isolated for some time. You have to risk it. Even no woman may stand with you. No woman may stand by you. You know, even women may not stand by you. That is the situation in our society.
The extreme.
Yeah.
The extreme of it, what I want to share is that I heard from one of an eminent personality in the society himself. He was saying that especially in this Malabar area, because there are many managements are not actually willing to appoint women, because they say that women, they have limited time, they don't stay late and all those things and all. So when I discussed this thing to another lady teacher, she told us, of course, Huda, how is it possible? We are people coming from family. You know, so this is how she said in Malayalam to me. Okay, after your school and college academic works. That's it. So this is the attitude even we have even among our female staffs too. So don't you think that this has to be, it's not just we keep on quoting Spivak or Butler and all those people.
You see, that is the kind of, disjunction that we are living in. Maybe there's always this gap between the ideal and the practice, Huda. I understand you completely, because very often I go for certain meetings to certain colleges and I find women academics who are in very top positions, very responsible positions. It is heartbreaking for me to hear that. But they tell me, because I go for this English meeting, so naturally they refer to our syllabi. And I have teachers telling me, feminism class but this is a hard reality. This is a very hard reality. I'm not saying we should reconcile ourselves to it, but we have to keep talking about it, to push the boundaries. But it is a hard reality. They tell me, and I feel very, very, very sad. Yeah, okay. Yes.
Ma'am, thank you so much. I have a question.
Yes. Amrita, yeah. This is Amrita? Okay.
Yeah, I'm Amrita. Your talk was an eye-opener. Thank you so much. And my question is, what consequences does surveillance have on children?
Children are the most surveilled sections, isn't it? And it is from a child. It's a very, very important question you are asking, because all this gendered behavior starts from gender, caste, sexuality. All these things start from the childhood. There's a very strict watch kept on children, and this good child, bad child label is something through which that surveillance gets operated. So children are traumatized. Children are never accepted as they are. We realized the trauma much later, the kind of taboos and prohibitions and punishments that they are forced upon them without trying to understand. We have a very, it's very sad. If we go into this topic, it's going to be even sadder. We'll end up as very sad people, because we think we are bringing them up in a very healthy manner. But it's not. That's what's happening. They grow up with a lot of anger because so much of them is being suppressed in the name of being a good, obedient child. Because what is original? I wish the school teachers, as teachers, a little bit of Freudian psychoanalysis, and this is taught. They use it because a child is born with a lot of natural drives and instincts, and the child doesn't know what is acceptable and unacceptable, etc. So unless you have a very sensitive teacher out there who's able to understand the differences of children, we want to put all children into one mold. And there are children who are definitely out of that mold. I'm not making any value judgments there, but there are children who won't fit into molds. What do you do with them? School should not be a place where such children are punished or marginalized or stigmatized. School is a place where all kinds of children should be encouraged to express, to understand. Sometimes it is just a very, very sympathetic listening that a child requires. But it doesn't happen. You're immediately boxed, put into boxes. So surveillance is something which is taught to our own classmates. One classmate is surveilling the other, always. I always, when you're a child, you want to become the class leader. Much later, I realized it is such a hateful job. You're actually working as an agent of the teacher. The monitor is the monitor. Monitor is not literally carrying out the monitoring activity. Or finding out what the students are saying, what that child said, that girl talked, she brings that books to all these things this information is being passed to the teacher in the name of enforcing discipline. Much later, it took me a long time to understand that it's a very hateful activity that I'm doing, and people hate monitors. I thought it is actually a label of being a very good student. I'm glad I was never a monitor. But this is what is happening. This is how the schools enforce discipline. All our schools are busy creating certain kind of citizens, but not really. I don't think we are still in that kind of an enlightened school system where children are allowed to blossom in their spontaneous manner. Schools are becoming instruments for muzzling spontaneity. This is my experience. If at all there is an exception to this, I'd be delighted to hear about that.
Hello, ma'am. My name is Girish. I'm a student in the department, 2004.
Yes, Girish, I can see that.
Okay.
You were in our department. Oh, Girish.
Yeah, I am, ma'am.
Hi, Girish. Oh, great to see you. Yeah. Okay. Yes, Girish.
Thanks a lot for after 16 years. I listened to you again.
Yeah. Yes, very much, Girish. Yes, Girish, okay. I can hear you. Yeah.
So thanks a lot for actually, it is actually a kind of subversion in your discussion regarding from the state-owned surveillance to a phallic economies of surveillance. I mean, especially in the case of gender perspective. So I was, when Huda, one of the participants, asked about this academic gender surveillance. Actually,
yes.
Really, we were all talking about it. Many of the friends share all the same experiences. So another question, actually, in many of the universities, especially in our area, there is a patriarchal, economies in the academic discipline, especially in the realm of guides. So many issues were being subdued and regulated as you talk about isolated events or politically motivated incidents. So just my question, is our academy still in a patriarchal form of subtle forms of gender surveillance still going?
Yes, it's very sad, unfortunate, but it is so, Girish. Academic space is very much gendered, very, very patriarchal even now. Because I hear certain comments being made about women academicians. Very often it is said that avarkathavali meritonnulya. Though there are male academics also who are equally average. But the way you talk about them is different from the way a woman is talked about. I've seen very horrible situations in our own departments, where I taught in various colleges, where women are always referred to in a very, very disparaging manner, women academicians. While there are brilliant women academicians, there were people who are so committed, so sincere to their work. I've seen some brilliant work coming out from women academicians today. But then generally there's a tendency to devalue them or run them down. And there are also women who are not sincere, who don't do justice to their jobs. But there are men too. If we are neutral and objective about both, I have no problems. But when we are talking about women, there is another flavor that is added to it. Very often. very often. I'm not saying it is always there. There are, at the same time, I must say, there are very self-conscious, there are very conscientious academicians who try not to get into that kind of a rhetoric also. So my hope is in them. And in younger academicians like you who are very conscious about it and who are trying to get out of it in your own ways. So I don't see it as a hopeless situation. The very fact that we are addressing this, that itself is a sign of hope. Because we can't expect the world to change overnight in one fell swoop. It doesn't happen. At least to let us recognize that this is a problem and then move on. See, it is very often asked, it is very often said that women's value in the marriage market in Kerala go up if you are a permanent lecturer in a college. Why? Because it is a UGC pay scale. The pay scales are pretty high now. What is ironical is that you expect that woman to bring that money in, but not the kind of intelligence, the education, the consciousness that she must have acquired over a period of time while she was working for a NET or a JRF or a assistant professor when she was going through that assistant professorship interview in a college. She has evolved as a conscious being. You don't want that consciousness. You want only that money. Isn't it funny? You are buying, or you literally want only, it is just a mercenary kind of understanding. It's not that educated being that you want. It's ironical. It is sad, but it is true. Because I heard recently that one of the marriage brokers, they asked us that permanent lecturer ആണോ guest lecturer ആണോ എന്നുള്ളതാണ്. കാരണം അപ്പൊ പൈസയാണ്, അപ്പൊ lectureship അല്ല, പൈസയാണ് മുഖ്യമായിട്ടുള്ള കാര്യം. And maybe the stability of the job. So this goes, this is the kind of situation. We are a very complex society where we can't, I'm still trying to understand the so-called literacy of Kerala.
Thank you, progressive
pretensions. Thank you, Girish, for that question. I hope you're fine. Great to hear your voice. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all. I think I should intervene here. Both our
Please,
sessions,
Anand. Yes.
both our sessions had to be extended due to the live nature of those sessions. It was a splendid session, ma'am. Thank you so much for being with us for this past 1 hour. And to the participants, thank you all for being here for the past 2 hours in a single go. We had to club those 2 sessions, and more than 200 participants were online for almost these 2 hours. So thank you all. Be here for tomorrow also for the 2 sessions that are coming up, one by Priya ma'am and one by Dr. Sayande. So thank you all for your participation today. Expect to see you tomorrow also. Thank you so much. And to our 2 notable speakers, Janaki ma'am and Ajay sir, I cannot thank you enough. Thank you so much for accepting our invite.
Yeah, thank you, Anand, for a great session, and it's a learning experience for me too. I also must, I hope I haven't, used up too much of time and inconvenienced you all. I'm just feeling worried about that. Did it go too long? Drag out too long? I don't know. Yeah.
It was convenient.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Anand. Yes.
So if any of you faced any kind of technical difficulties, just do comment in the WhatsApp group or somewhere so that we can rectify it for tomorrow. Thank you all for being here. And I have to thank one more person, Nasrullah sir, for providing the support and guidance for this webinar. So thank you all. Do come online tomorrow also. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.